Today on the Pro Talk podcast, we're talking about health. That's right, your health, how to stay healthy. But before I get into today's guest and introduce him to you, make sure you push that subscription button as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode with another amazing professional. Today's guest, we have a doctor in the house. That's right, he's a doctor, he's an author, he's also a business owner, and a father of three. A man who once said, I've always believed if you invest in people, you'll never be poor. So, without any further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Richard Cohen to the Pro Talk podcast. Richard, how are you?
Fantastic, Rob. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be joining you from the car as I drive back to Atlanta from Florida after Thanksgiving.
This is a first. That's right. First time we've done it in the
Yeah,
car.
yeah. There's lots of traffic, so it's very easy going.
Yeah, so it's the homecoming trip or the Thanksgiving trip back to the ATL on 75
Yeah,
is always fun.
yeah. I haven't even made it to 75 yet. I'm still on the turnpike, so who knows how long I'll really be in here.
Oh man. Well, you're coming back from sunny Florida, but you
hmm
came to the United States. Most people um, that know you know your story. Some people don't. You came here from Jamaica in 2004. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah,
And
I came up via New York, which is not surprising for any Caribbean person. It's usually either Florida or New York, very East Coast centric. A lot of big Caribbean communities in those hubs, and went to Binghamton University.
okay. So what were you studying?
Yeah, so I was a pretty good student back in Jamaica, and good students are often, let's call it, pigeonholed into doing certain things like, oh, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, a very white collar job. And even though there are opportunities for that in Jamaica, the general sentiment is that you should go abroad to kind of pursue an education because there's more opportunity there. So I was very much on that track. I was a pre-med student at Binghamton. And, you actually said, yes, I am a doctor, but I'm a doctor of chiropractic. Important distinction, especially for MDs who don't like when other doctors kind of co-opt co-opt that without a qualification. Nonetheless, yeah, I was a pre-med student, and all the way up until about junior year, I was quite content to be on that track. But bizarrely, as I kind of spent more time in clinical situations, spent more time talking to existing MDs, and I noticed the kind of the culture of healthcare delivery, in particular here in the States, it wasn't super consistent with the way I thought about health and health care. So I was getting disenchanted with the idea of being an input in that system. So I started to ask questions of friends of mine and colleagues, sharing my discontentment. And someone said, you should just be a chiropractor then. I had no idea what that was. So they described it to me. They actually dragged me to a not particularly impressive chiropractor in upstate New York, but one where I saw a kind of relationship between the doctor and the patient, one where the doctor kind of conservatively use their hands to bring about these health outcomes with preserving the nervous system and people's own ability to preserve themselves and self-regulate. And I was like, this is much more in line with how I imagine people should stay healthy versus manage sickness. And so I fell in love with it right in there and pivoted to becoming a chiropractor right in 2006.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because I saw a quote of you. It said that you were nearing the end of my pre-med curriculum. Something about that culture of the students and that profession disquieted me. I wasn't getting a sense that medical doctors were really in a position to help people stay healthy, even though they were excellent at saving lives. You said manage sickness. You just said that. Can you
Yes.
expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. No, mind you, what medical doctors do, particularly in emergency situations, dare I say, the stuff of miracles. And when you think about the rigor of the education and how much they know, that's really impressive and appropriate for them to do so. But, if, and you can probably attest to this, but if you maintain a pretty good health status and you show up to the doctor to be like, hey, just kind of checking in to see if I'm doing well, they'll be like, well, yeah, it's clear that you are. What are you here for? I could be tending to somebody who's kind of sick, right? And healthcare in America is also infiltrated with a lot of particular interests from the pharmaceutical guys and the insurance guys, and I don't even need to be a conspiracy theorist when I talk about the fact that it is bigger business to keep people unhealthy than it is to keep them well. And so there's some there's some insidious elements there that I know a lot of MDs contend with, much sometimes against their will. Private practitioners really struggle to preserve their morals in some situations, when they're in their own practice, to give the best advice to their patients versus staying in a group or a hospital situation where administration will kind of dictate how people should be managed, even though they themselves may not be MDs. And so it's the stuff you see in medical dramas. It seems dramatized, but you speak to any MD and they'll say it's very much like that. And so those are the things that I certainly wanted to avoid when I thought about any kind of healthcare delivery. And it's just a pity that these highly learned, highly skilled people, honestly, don't always get to act in their patient's best interest, if there is kind of this overshadowing kind of force or power that tells them how they have to do it.
Well, you said you're not a conspiracy theorist, but I think if we sit down this afternoon to watch a football game, the
Hmm.
commercials, there's going to be about three commercials. One is crappy food, fast
Yeah, yeah,
food,
yeah,
followed
yeah.
by somebody's got an ailment and then some pharmaceutical thing to take. And then the real kicker is side effects might include liver failure, suicidal tendencies, and turn
Yeah, yeah,
into an
yeah.
axe murderer, crazy crap like that.
Yeah, and again, look, there's a time and a place for everything. I just wish that people felt empowered enough to not get to a point where they have to make kind of a bad choice or a worse choice. And that's unfortunately where I think a lot of people end up interacting with the healthcare system, is at the junction of, well, I didn't realize, or I had no way to assess that I was having some issue, or I never learned about, one thing or the other about my own body to the point where I could maybe have intervened earlier. So, there's certainly a public health push that I think would really, really benefit us. And that starts from elementary school all the way up. I mean, the way that physical education is no longer prioritized, the kind of times I hear my own children spend on either PE or even just on the playground, it's getting less and less in the interest of kind of, let's call it, technical proficiency and kind of meeting these education standards. And I find it unusual because I don't think our children are learning that much more than we are, and yet they have less time to tend to themselves as a whole. So I don't know. It's very unusual, and I don't have the answer to that, but I wish it wasn't the case. Mhm.
I heard somebody giving a speech before he even talked about COVID. It was probably September of 2020. And he mentioned from the months of October through March, especially if you're living north of the Mason-Dixon line, that you should supplement your diet with vitamin D because we don't get enough sunshine. And I thought, well, that's a simple thing. I've never been told that ever in my life, that go outside and get some sunshine. It's good for you. And kids today in elementary schools, you were talking about not even getting PE, but they won't even let them go outside if it's below 40 degrees because they think it's bad for them. And it's like, well, you need to get some fresh air too.
Yeah, it's it man, it's such a challenge because all of that is really, really very layered. Um, health recommendations are very interesting. Way back in the day when we didn't have significant advances in medicine, there used to be a treatment called heliotherapy for a number of things, which was literally taking people outside into the sun. That was it. Getting fresh air, getting sunlight on your body, and that's just never recommended anymore. You know, Even though it had all these wonderful benefits, in the case of, I don't know, TB or things that required penicillin, it's like, well, this wonder drug allows these people to recover, but at the same time, we're robbing them of these other really important and vital things like sunlight, by keeping them locked up in a hospital ward for some number of days with closed windows and no circulating air, or it is circulating air, not fresh air. And I think that we should be adding to versus replacing things that we know work. You know, generations before us relied on herbal remedies and teas. Like every drug is effectively something that was determined to be good for something in nature, but then patented by changing up the chemical formula a little bit in a lab. And so there are advances for things that affect us now that do need to be managed, maybe with pharmaceuticals, but I don't think we should be abandoning things that we know just work, especially if they're more conservative, cheaper, and accessible to everybody.
Well, and if there's no repeat money attached
The
to it,
repeat. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's bad business.
right? And
Yeah.
I've always felt like, when you get your car fixed, it's like, I don't want to be back here in a month for you to fix it again. You
Yes.
fix my car. Now my
Yes.
body goes to see a chiropractor. Can you help me with, if I've never been to a chiropractor, I believe in chiropractic, but
Yeah, yeah. The one of the challenges with chiropractic is a little bit on the marketing side. Most people's first interaction or exposure to chiropractic is in context of somebody who might have been in a car accident. It's just on the list of recommended providers, or they hear somebody who had a really bad headache or back pain, obviously, and that a chiropractor is really good for those things. So the misconception though is that, well, adjustments address pain from car accidents, pain from headaches, pain from uh, the back pain. But what's actually happening is that what a chiropractor does is we realign the spine to preserve not just its integrity, but to improve the biomechanics and to minimize any what's called interference to the nervous system, because inside of that spinal column is the spinal cord. And everything your brain is trying to tell your body, and everything your body's trying to tell your brain from a communication standpoint, travels through this really important conduit. And so, if your body is to have a chance of recovering from the headache, from the back pain, from any of these other internal ailments, and or respond appropriately to things from the outside, you want to make sure your brain and your body are talking properly. So what you find is that it speeds up recovery from all of these things and allows your body to preserve really important vital energy that it can then appropriate to other things. Because what often happens is, yes, someone will come in on a pain-based basis for chiropractic, but then as they get adjusted for a while, they start to notice these other improvements that they didn't advertise on the examination, uh, but they're like, I used to get breakouts whenever I ate blank. And I mean, this is just an abstract example, but I find that they're not happening as often, or they're not as severe. And do you think the chiropractic had anything to do with that? And what we try to explain is, look, the chiropractic was a catalyst, but you have everything to do with that. Like, we didn't go in there and adjust a breakout bone or a digestion bone.
mm,
It's not such a mechanistic approach. It's that we are setting you up to be as efficient and stable as possible. You now have a surplus of resources that your body can now divvy up to do other things. And when that happens, sometimes there's magic. And in other cases, it's just a slight improvement in your quality of life. But for most people, that's okay, because chiropractic's super cheap and super accessible. Now, I don't want us to turn into a big marketing thing for chiropractic, but that's literally the nature of it. And I think you might have experienced that in your own life. But that's why it's easy for me to even talk about it, because I'm not trying to sell anything. It just works, whether you believe in it or not.
mhm. Well, and I think our society is so quick fixed that take this pill, or that pill. How about exercising? How about, your diet? How does that all affect it?
You bring up a good point. The One of the challenges, and this is the probably the biggest culprit for most of what we're contending with, even the issues with youth, is that we have always talked about, like, getting more done with less, right? Like a hyper efficiency, especially in American, let's call it the capitalist culture. We feel it in the workplace, and we can talk about AI and what that's doing. We feel it in coursework and extracurricular activities. This idea that I have to separate myself from everyone by doing way more than anyone else with seemingly less. And if we do that, a few things happen. One, we become exceptional. Like we get really, really productive. Like we get a lot of stuff done, often at the sacrifice of, I don't know, sleep, interpersonal relationships. Um, but then, as opposed to having, let's say, a reward where we get to take a break, we get assigned more stuff. A patient of mine once shared that one of the challenges of, uh, you know, kind of corporate culture is work is a pie eating contest where the prize for winning is more pie. And so there's never there's never a situation where you're not having the pie.
Mhm.
And no one can subsist on a diet of pie. And that's one of the real big issues. So even for our students who are trying to separate themselves either with exceptional academia by doing as many AP classes as possible and doing interbaccalaureate classes if their high school allows for that, whilst taking the SAT, the ACT, the SAT too, all these things that will separate them and volunteering their time and then playing two sports at a varsity level. These are all, dare I say, coveted things, but at this point, it's also the like lowest barrier of entry for a prestigious program in college, and so even the most is becoming not enough, and that's really, really that's one of the challenges that I see in high performing young people who are experiencing burnout at kind of record levels and at much earlier ages. So whereas for us, when you were a multi-sport athlete, yeah, that was rare, and it created like an opportunity for you to go to school and get this education because maybe you were a middle of the road student but a great athlete. You now have somebody who's already doing that but is also an exceptional student, and they're altruistic and give their time, and they invented a robot and all of these things, and then they kind of struggle to get into Georgia Tech, you know and then their future is uncertain when it comes to getting through that program because the job that they thought they would have is, effectively being replaced by a robot. So it's a bizarre landscape when you think about the ask of a young person. Uh, the carrot and the stick have changed, and that I think that's kind of unfortunate because what I also find is from an earnings perspective, a blue collar job, which used to be, dare I say, poo pooed back in the day. It's like, oh, don't be the plumber. Don't fix air conditioning units. It's grunt work. You come home filthy. You know, those guys earn a lot of money. you know, and yeah, that's because the things that they do are almost impossible to replace with automation. But they also build up a reputation if you're good at that job. People just talk. One of the jobs that I have is I'm a DJ, right? And I don't think you've seen me DJ, but I'm pretty good at it. And if I had really wanted to, I think I could have really pushed that and gone really far with it if I didn't love being a chiropractor. But at this point, I only do jobs that are word of mouth because I don't have to spend any time marketing it because gigs recur. You know, oh my gosh, the Halloween party was great. I'll see you next year. Somebody who was at the party will be like, oh my God, my kid's turning 16. I'm trying to throw a party. And, before you know it, I've DJed all the way up until the Atlanta Braves. I used to work with those guys on the Battery quite a bit for a lot of their programming in conjunction with a company I worked with called Jam and DJs. So it's like opportunities used to be like that. But now we're trying to pursue this golden egg, which kind of doesn't exist anymore.
Well, you mentioned that about the DJ, and I had that on my list here of asking you about your favorite music and so forth. And so, when you got in the DJ thing, that was just a passion.
Okay, so fun fact, like the joke is that every Caribbean man is actually also a DJ. Like we
It loves
culturally,
reggae.
yeah, no, not reggae specifically. I mean, even though most of us, kind of grew up on that music, but culturally, music is a way to gather people together. I think that's kind of a global truth. And so, what's interesting is when you have hardships in life, uh, as most people do in a developing country, you escape these things with gatherings and parties because you might not have a high quality day to day life. You might not be able to obtain the things that you want, but you can lose yourself and get with some of your favorite people at a party, and if the music is good, that's like a big thing that glues everyone together. And so, yeah, that was something I experienced as a young man. And DJs and what they do and their creativity in that space is quite coveted. But in what happened with me was I used to make just little mixed CDs for myself. And I would make little mixed CDs. I had a little Discman that I would carry around, and I would listen to other DJs as well. And then I started selling those discs for like $5 in college. And people would buy them, and I was like, okay, this is a little bit of income. And then eventually I went to a house party, my first American college house party. I was so excited. By the way, I spoke to those kids in high school about this story. I went to the party and I arrived at a reasonable time, and it was the worst party I'd ever been to. There was that one guy in the corner playing the guitar, a couple kids playing flip cup. It was nothing like the Animal House and old school that I had imagined from media and movies. And so these are my friends who lived in this house. I said, listen, guys, I cannot come back to another party unless there's music. And if you don't have any, I will play it. And they said, sure. So a couple weeks later, they had another party, and I showed up. I played. It was a rager, and someone there asked me to DJ for a semi-formal for like Hillel, Hillel of Binghamton. And it's funny, I have a very Jewish last name, but I'm not Jewish, so I had to do a whole bunch of research on what this might look like. But I said, sure, $300, and they said done. I was like, should have asked for five.
Right.
But $300, for 4 or 5 hours, for a college student as a sophomore at the time, felt pretty good. And literally, that is how my DJ career was born. And opportunities just continued to kind of land my way as like the reputation kind of spread. So yeah, I'm 22 years into DJing, which is much more than the 13 years I've been a chiropractor. Um, but I'm passionate about it for sure, and that's something that I talk to young people about now. That it's really important that you stay connected to the things you're passionate about, because that will add the balance to your life. That, dare I say, the pursuit of the golden egg, that big professional payoff, that comes at great personal cost more often than not. And if you don't
Hmm.
have anything to stabilize you, you can really get lost in the sauce. So, yeah, so I keep it close to me.
Well, you said something that about the DJ and it was making money. There's a great lesson there that you did something that was providing value and was fun, and the icing on the cake was you got paid for it.
Oh, 100%. One of the beautiful things about, let's call it gig work, and this extends to even those blue collar jobs we were talking about, is you get to dictate your own price. People can always choose otherwise, but there's a difference between me as a $300 DJ at the time and someone who you try to hire for 2 hours and they cost you $10,000. And but there's perceived value. There's perceived value. So you get to choose your own adventure when it comes to stuff like that. And a salary feels very safe, but there are things that come with that. There are things that come with that,
Hmm.
expectations that sometimes will certainly change. And the better you are at your job, the more work you're going to get. it's it's one of
Hmm.
those rare things where doing more now does not allow you to do less later. You kind of have to still do more later as well. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting shift.
Well, let's go back to that because you mentioned the speech that you gave. Unfortunately, it's nowhere recorded, but you gave a speech that was excellent. So you spoke to, was it some high school kids?
Yes, these were the National Honor Society inductees for 2025 at Lakeside High School in Decatur, Georgia. Yes, I was asked by a patient of mine who, uh, I think she ran down the list of people she'd want to ask, and everybody else said no. So she got to me, and I said yes. But no, she wanted me to speak on leadership and character, and that's something that my own personal journey I had to, you know, understand what that meant. Because yeah, if you're in charge of something, it's easy to kind of run. astray of maybe even your beliefs or your morals. It's where corruption happens at the highest levels. And so, what does it mean to be in a position where you have a lot of power whilst also preserving, elements of your character? And, so I started with a quote, and I tried not to talk about too many other wise words from wise people. But Martin Luther King, education and character. That's the goal of any true education is to have knowledge and character, because in the absence of that, it can really run afoul. And I mean, we see that in everyday society. So I spoke with them very earnestly. I had no prepared speech. I remember what it was like being 16 and 17 and being at that junction of, okay, well, I'm doing well in school. I'm thinking about doing this thing. How do I go about it? What, who am I as a person? Is this important to me? Naturally, my big junction point happened later as a junior in college, when after seeing some of my own professional ambitions in real life, I didn't feel like it was for me, but it took a lot of courage to kind of abandon a long held belief that, well, this is what I was born to do or need to do, and venture into this space where in chiropractic for me, where it was like I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what the challenges were going to be, but I knew it made me feel the way I wanted to feel about healthcare. So I spoke about that journey and what it means to have aptitude, what it means to cultivate an opportunity, um, and that it's okay to also let people know that you can do something. Setting up boundaries is designed to protect you, and that if you do have something to offer, it doesn't mean you have to give all of it until nothing is left. So I uh, I gave the example too of what it meant to be a parent, because all of their parents were also in the crowd. And I explained to them, the beautiful thing, we look up to our parents because they hopefully, provided lots of guidance and stability in our lives. And I said, I guarantee you, though, if you have an earnest conversation with any of your parents now, when you were born, they had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea what they were doing. And you are going to feel that way as you venture out to the world, not knowing what this opportunity might mean. You're not going to know what to do with it. But all journeys start with these steps. Just, I feel good about this direction. I'm going to put this foot in front of the other. And before you know it, you'll arrive to where you think you want to be. And if it's not where you thought you want to be, that's okay too. But it is your reality, it's your truth. And always take ownership of your behaviors, because no one's going to force you to do anything. You know, you should always be an agent of your own free will and preserve your autonomy. If something runs afoul of the way you feel, speak up about it. That's totally appropriate. So that's what I kind of wove into that 10-minute block where I spoke with them, and it appeared to be well received. The parents seemed to like it because I shouted them out, um, but a lot of the students actually shook my hand as they received their certificates, and said, that was a great speech, and they appreciated it. So, yeah, any opportunity I have to impart some wisdom, I'll definitely try.
Well, and you probably mentioned how scary is good, that a lot of things that you've done in your life, you're in a different country, and it's just not the easy path.
Oh my God! I mean, I could dive into that because, like, for example, I mean, in 2020, when the world was on its head, that was when I was going through my divorce. I also, the pandemic, of course, was happening and affecting everyone. I had taken a pay cut in my job, and my whole future just was very amorphous and uncertain. And between 2020 and 2022 is where I had to do a lot of soul searching. Like, the hardships I was feeling, I felt like a piece of driftwood in the ocean of my own life. I was doing things, but I felt I had no control over the outcomes. And so it got to a point where I said, okay, I need to be in charge of my own personal and professional destiny. It's where I approached my employer at the time, and I said, hey, I need to know if I'll have an opportunity to buy this practice, or I have to start off on my own. Like, it's just, it got that severe. But in addition to that, because I had never really, like, I've always been a hustler, right? So between the DJing and everything else, I knew how to scrap. But when it came to, an official, tax ID business and I didn't have any of that. So the idea of full-time entrepreneurship was also very scary. And I knew that it involved doing a lot of things that I probably had no excitement for, particularly on the administrative side, paperwork, working with an accountant, going through this budget and that, and hiring people, firing people, all the unpleasantries. And so even though I didn't feel great about those things and all the stuff I wouldn't find out until after I was in it, I decided to do something to prepare myself mentally for that challenge, which was run a half marathon. So in 2021, I really have to give shout outs to my good friend Sandra, who convinced me to do this. Uh, but I was approached to run a half marathon, and you know this: Jamaicans do not like to run distance at all. Like I'm a sprinter. I mean, if it's over 200 meters, it's like a hard no for me. And so the idea of 13.1 miles was so daunting. Like I have visceral like nausea at the idea. Oh, it's way more than that actually. Um, but when the question came into my life when I was challenging everything, I was experiencing peak burnout, and I was at that place of like purgatory. And so I said, well, this must be in my life at this moment for a reason. And so I looked at it, and I asked for 3 days to think on it before I gave an answer. And then I said, yes, but only if one, the course is relatively flat, and two, it's cool enough because I overheat. And done. So January 2022 in Charleston is where it all went down. And we trained for about 7, almost 8 months. And the training, it wasn't even the best training. Like I only ran like 1 or 2 times per week. And I never ran more than 8 miles. Just the way my schedule worked. And honestly, the fact that I just did not, I was a very unwilling training partner. But I showed up and I still did it. And then funnily enough, a week before the race, the city of Charleston canceled the official thing on account of COVID concerns. They couldn't get enough staff to like staff the thing, and so I was freaking out because I'm like, I'm not gonna prepare for this any other time in my life. So we went anyway. They have this belt line, poor man's belt line. They're called the West Ashley Greenway, and it's about 7.5 paved miles of trail. Um, and I said, okay, well, we can do it on this thing because the official route is no longer blocked off. So I wasn't going to run on the road. We can do 6.55 miles out, 6.55 miles back, and that's the half marathon. So we did it. I didn't have the benefit of a cheering crowd, watering stations, any of that stuff. So we had to prepare a little differently on race day. My partner Sandra, she is much faster than me. She's like a gazelle. She after 5 miles, I couldn't even see her. And so at mile 8, which was my maximum in training, where I was literally in the middle of nowhere, I had no music, I had nothing to distract me except my pain, my physical pain, and all of those terrible, terrible thoughts. We have such bad self-talk, which was just basically cursing myself. Why are you doing this, man? You did enough. You got past 8 miles. This is great. Just get an Uber. It's gonna be fine. And I had to overcome. That was the hardest part. The last 5.1 miles was an absolute magnum opus of you know overcoming your demons. And I think each of us contends with that at some point in our lives because it's very easy to quit. It is very, very easy to quit. And I didn't. And I'm so grateful that I didn't. I broke down at the end. Like I got to the end, Sandra was already cooled off. She finished 15 minutes before me. But I was very happy with my time. I did it in 2 hours and 16 minutes. And I wept, I had never done anything like that before. Probably most importantly, I'd never overcome myself in the way that I had. And that helped me feel more prepared to take on a business. Did it make me perfectly prepared? No. But it made me much more resilient to the things that I didn't know were going to be, a huge pain in the ass.
Well, there's some Navy SEAL in you, man. How many times that you had that 1 second decision of quitting and then you
Yeah,
overcame that? And I think
several
that's
thousand,
awesome. Y-
several thousand.
Well, so now I was thinking, what the heck is wrong with you, man? It's like concentrate on the business. Who wants to run a half marathon ever? Because I don't enjoy running, but I really respect the people that do. But what you
Yes,
just did
same.
there, I think, is awesome. That you had something that scared you, running and owning a business. So you did something scary and outside the box, totally
Yeah,
different than running a business.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Um, and I get it with the half marathon was just a metaphor, you know. Not only was I again contending with, the looming idea of, okay, if whether I buy a business or I start off on my own, what does that look like? It's a big kind of specter. But I had all of the self-doubt and self-worth issues from going through a divorce, so there's all these layers that, you wonder, am I going to be good enough? Is my effort going to pay off? Like there's this nebulous cloud of uncertainty that accompanies important life decisions. But therapy helps with this, by the way. One thing I've really learned is that we will never know how anything will play out, especially when there are other people involved. There are too many variables. But what we have to do when it comes to decisions is to make the decision, but then have the kind of gumption to converge reality to the outcome that we want. Like, we don't get to know before we choose. So we have to always leap blindly, and it isn't always a leap. Sometimes it's just a big step, but we can't wait to know what's going to happen before we make something happen. So the power of choice, the power of uh, blind confidence in some instances is valuable. No, blind confidence and recklessness, they live their neighbors, and so it's important not to jump that fence.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I still based my decision off of data, metrics, market conditions, whatever. But there's going to be stuff that you don't know, but if you have enough to take a chance, you should always take it on yourself. Yes, growing up in a developing country, I didn't always have the things that I needed. And the fact that I have any success at all is a big piece of it is that my own effort, but I relied on many, many people, not least of which was my family and my parents, my three sisters, everyone who's ever been close to me, and of course my very, very good friends who went through, a 7-year education program at an all boys boarding school on top of a mountain in the country in Jamaica. Like,
Hmm.
you don't just you can't do it on your own. You just can't do it on your own. And I had the good fortune of also observing people who really grew and kind of became the best version of themselves because they were surrounded by the right people. You know, I've also seen people who were exploited by others who they thought were their friends, but who fell away as soon as that person didn't offer them whatever it was that they wanted in that relationship. And so it made it clear to me that you have to be very selective about the people that you have in your life, because some will take and some will 100% build you up. There are others who subscribe to the idea that the high tide raises all ships. And this is not about everyone having everything. It's about everyone having what they need, and they have the opportunity to get what they don't have from others who share. So it's something that I've always been open with my time, my feelings about a number of things, because if it adds value to somebody's life, it doesn't take much for me to do that. And I'll never forget somebody. I He was 3 years my junior in high school. I He lived in my boarding house, so I was kind of his senior. I had to supervise those youngsters when I got further up in the program. I was a prefect. And I remember being particularly hard on this kid because he was a little bit of a whiner. He was a little bit of a whiner. And I remember kind of, let's just say good naturedly, but I don't know if he received it that way at the time. but I really tried to help him, like toughen him up a little bit, by letting him know this isn't the hardest thing you're gonna do, and that he should push through. And again, there's ways of encouragement that I probably can't even
Hmm.
discuss here, but I pushed him, and I graduated. I got through college. I'm in chiropractic school. This is, I don't know, 15 years later, maybe. I get a message from this kid. And I mean, I had not talked to him in that whole time. I get a message from this kid on Facebook. He had just graduated from college, with a technical degree or a technological degree, and he said he was reflecting on the people that helped him get to that point, and he wanted to thank me for how I pushed him, that some decade and a half prior. And I was just like, what? My memory of that was, vague, and, it seemed unimportant to me. I was doing for him what I would do for anybody, in that situation. But the fact that small things can have profound impacts on others means that we should always show up authentically every day. And if it's something that, we can just do for someone else in that moment, like, there's no reason that we shouldn't. Because I have enough feedback. I have enough, you know, life lessons. I've seen it, experience it for myself in a way that, I'm very committed to that. I never want to lose that part of myself where it's like, yeah, if I can do this thing, share this with you, in some cases, learn a hard lesson with you, like, that's okay, because that builds us up.
Hmm. Well, you said a couple great things there. A lot of people are afraid of those tough things or the tough conversations. And I understand that most athletes have a mentor or somebody that pushed them that you didn't always care for, didn't like that delivery that they gave it to you, but it was good information. I know some of your athletic background because years ago you helped me with some running, some sprint work that I was looking to do. So your athletic background, you grew up, I mean, the stereotype is every Jamaican guy's fast. and, and you got wheels, so you can't dispel that
Yes.
myth, right?
Yeah. So, my journey is kind of funny. I grew up because track and field is very accessible, right? One of the reasons it's so popular in Jamaica is that all you need is an open area to run in order to compete, in track and field. Whereas most other sports require, specific facilities, equipment, special shoes, and, those things can be, expensive and out of most people's price range. And then furthermore, what you guys called field day, in the States, is something that is highly competitive in Jamaica called Sports Day. And it's basically a bona fide track meet that's run at the earliest levels, like way down in elementary school. It's an all day affair. The parents come, they're in the stands. Sometimes there are events for both parents and students. And it is a production, and it's super competitive. So, there's this fiery crucible that we all go through in track and field, where if you have, athletic ability, it often shows up on the track. So I grew up in that, and I was fast. Even though all of what you're hearing about me now might suggest I'm pretty hardworking, I was also a little bit lazy. And so I had talent on the track, and, I was on the track team, up until about age 14. But the track and field training was so hard. The first time I ever puked from working out was doing hills for sprint training, and it was so unpleasant. No, I was dabbling in both track and field and tennis because, thanks to my mom, she had some super old tennis rackets from when I was in Jamaica, and I remember just hitting the ball around with a wooden tennis racket with legit catgut strings, and, I remember liking it. And so I kind of transitioned that into, playing it more often when I was in high school. And the beautiful thing is, again, we lived on campus. The track was down the mountainside, on like a bit of a trail, in the woods down to the track, and then you'd have to do this rigorous track training and then hike up this steep hill to get back to the dorms and shower and get your meals. And it was so punishing. Like, it was so punishing. I started to favor the tennis training because the courts were right in front of my boarding house. So I was like, I'm gonna go to tennis today. I don't want to go track. So I started to put all my energy into tennis. And eventually, you don't show up to track training enough. They're like, so you're just not on the team? What are we doing? And I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to focus on tennis. And that's kind of the story there. But what would happen is sports day would show up once a year and I would still represent my house. And people are like, but you're so fast. Why aren't you on the track team? I was like, I don't want to trade. I didn't want to trade. So, that was 14, 15-year-old me back then. Technique wise, I still know I have a lot of sprint training in me. I couldn't dare try to take off the way I used to know, or I'll rip every
Hmm.
muscle out of my leg. Yeah, it's a fun time. It was a fun time.
So there's no truth to the rumor that you used to be the freeze at Braves games after you DJ'd?
There is no truth. Oh my God. If I could do that many things at once.
Uh,
No, that guy actually got the skinny on him. Apparently he's an actual track athlete that went to Kennesaw State because I always wanted to run against the freeze.
mm.
Because I think with a head start, but only with a head start, I'll definitely be able to take him because that man's quick. He is fast.
It's great entertainment. It's like that guy thinks he's going to win. Nope.
No. As soon as I look at the footwear. As soon as I see, the Crocs or
Yeah,
uh, the Crocs not in sports mode or the
right.
flip flops and
The
they're trying
frat
to run, I'm
boy.
like, it's a wrap.
Yeah,
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 the boat shoes, I'm like, yeah, it's a done deal.
yeah. Well, it's even more hilarious to me. Like, I remember watching Carl Lewis and, where his head was still, it's like he was just on glass. And,
Yes,
that's a quality of all great athletes, keeping your head still where everything gets
yes.
better. But when you watch, the average human out there just running spastically, trying to go fast, and then the freeze is just like this line
Oh
of
my God.
grace.
Yes, yeah, it looks almost feline in quality. Yeah, I mean, look, bodies in motion are beautiful. They always have been. I'm certainly always entranced by people who perform at the highest level because they often make it look so graceful when in reality, you attempt to do this stuff, it's like, holy smokes, this is impossible. I was reminded of this just last 2 weeks ago. I had to go to a daddy doc. It had me doing like hip hop dance. It was a hip hop class, and it was very very difficult. They were doing popping and locking and all this stuff, and you mess around in your house fine, but you actually try to learn choreograph moves. And we were only in there for 35 minutes. My body was destroyed the next day. It made me a little more empathetic to Reagan's performance at the Olympics, the Australian
Yeah,
breakdancer. I was
right.
like, okay, I see now why it could be this bad because not everybody can do it. So yeah, humans and performance are always fascinating. And as I was preparing for this, I did want to even broach because you train a lot of athletes, and I did want to broach the idea that it's weird because we think generationally that each generation is a little bit weaker than the last, for the average person. But then the outliers are more exceptional than generations of the past. And, we can suggest that technology and training methods are a part of that. But it's interesting to note that, between world records in different spaces, when you look at the top two tennis players right now in Alcaraz and Sinner, how ridiculous they are as competitors. You wonder, like, okay, if we do have the potential for this kind of performance, is it that the people on the fringes are sucking away all of the the juice from everybody in the middle because we have a very soft middle and very impressive fringes? What have you noticed even in your space as kind of a tennis pro and coach?
I think it's symptomatic of all sports, because I've talked to some baseball coaches and basketball coaches that the great ones, it doesn't matter what generation, they're going to be great. And those certain characteristics that they all have, it's like they just hated to lose and they would fight anybody to the death. Well, that's hard. And I think it's the stick to itiveness that the greats have, that they'll hang on longer than anybody else. It doesn't matter what they're playing. You hear stories of, Rick Macy talking about Serena and Venus when they were,
Mm,
whatever. It's like they would lose focus and unless they wanted a Pepsi and some Doritos, and that's what they wanted, they would fight you to the death. But I think kids because of some of the things that are in place, the helicopter parenting, we just don't want kids to feel bad. We just give them the easy route. And where I think
Yeah.
the great ones are going to suck it up a little bit longer than the average player. There's so many talented people. And I was talking to some close buddies a couple weeks ago about the top 50 players of today's generation, pretty close to the top 50 of other generations, but the depth of today's game, the 50 through 100, is much deeper. Um, I
Yes.
think that's just a progression of, okay, technology. What other sport have we gone through from wood rackets and metal rackets to graphite, titanium, fiberglass, and all these different composites of John McEnroe started with wood and then he went to graphite. Name another sport where you've had such change in technology. Then you look at when Sampras
Mm,
retired, Sampras was not using polyester strings. Darren Cahill got Andre Agassi to use polyester strings his last 2 years. He was using Kevlar, stuff called Pro Blend before his last 2 years. He tried polyester, which gives you greater spin rate. Rafael Nadal never played with the strings that I played with back in college and the strings that he plays now. And, I've got a poly blend in my racket. So those technology advances certainly make the game faster. But what makes the feet faster? Are the shoes that much better? Or is it
right.
because they've worked their butts off with what we've learned through, proper footwork training? Okay, pieces of the puzzle, the recovery. Foam rollers weren't around when I was in college.
That's right.
I do a vibrating foam roller every day now. And, Theraguns weren't around. Ice baths weren't even talked about. It's funny, the myth of, it used to be they would give you salt tablets. I remember back in the 70s, my brother and I were managers for a college football team. And they would put on the chalkboard, make sure you take extra salt. And they had these little salt tablets. And then it was, the last thing you should ever do is put sodium into your diet. And what, you know, now you got drinks
Yeah.
like Element and stuff like that, and proving, not all those misconceptions are valid. So, um,
Yes.
that's a long-winded answer to say that I don't know as far as, what makes a champion, but I think if you looked at when things are difficult, that one that comes out on top, that's the person that perseveres. Kind of like in that half marathon. It's like, the easy route you could have justified it and said, eight's good enough. A champion mindset to, gut it out. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and so there's two pieces to that too, because what you're basically saying is, okay, yes, there is all this technology that's available. There is more know-how, there is ingenuity, there is training methods, and recovery. However, knowing all of that doesn't change the fact that somebody still has to do it. Like the doing part, like that mental piece of, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna spend a little extra time working on technique. I'm gonna spend the additional time that's needed to recover so I minimize risk of injury. Like there's lots of great ones out there. If you don't understand what your body needs when it comes to both how to train and how to recover, it's gonna be short-lived. It's gonna be short-lived. And so I think all of us have incredible potential, but we have to be, as an individual, we have to be comfortable with the level that we get to based on our own input or output in this case. Like you can't complain. Let me not say you can't. I find it distasteful to complain about not reaching a level, not achieving something without doing the work required to get there. I'm sorry, it's just like you don't get to have it. It's just not it
Hmm.
wasn't meant for you. And so I won't say his name, but I do have a patient. He's one of my favorite people. He is not the picture of health. He's overweight and he smokes cigarettes and spends a lot of time kind of in a chair in his downtime. So he has health issues. However, I've been working with him now for a number of years. He said, "Look, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. I understand my limitations when it comes to my size and my behaviors. I'm probably not going to do the homework that you give to me, but I'm not hurting anybody. He has no family to speak of, not hurting anybody. I'm very comfortable and happy with where my life is. When you guys adjust me, it lasts about a week. And so I come back the next week and it helps me to manage my discomfort and I go about my life. And I said, that level of self awareness, like, again, I don't necessarily covet the outcomes or the way that he may live, but the fact that he takes responsibility for his situation does not then suggest that I'm not doing my job to heal him of all his ails when none of his behavior support that, because he takes on that like burden that, yeah, this is my life. And that he says, well, I'm not an affront to anybody's existence. I'm like, if everybody took responsibility for the situation and or were prepared to do the work to change their situation, this world would be a much better place.
Hmm.
This idea that I am owed something because of, I don't know, birthright or station in life. I mean, I don't know. Whatever the reasons are that people justify certain things, like, no, no, if you want something, you gotta work for it.
Yeah.
It requires effort.
Well, and it's the limit. It's like how far will you go? And I think it's set up too much for kids that they don't want to work that hard because it might be difficult. And then, there's strength in that struggle. And once they, like you said about that, with the, once you realize that you could run that half marathon, what's next?
Oh, I mean, what's next? I mean, well, as a parent, I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. As a parent, a big piece is one, remaining healthy enough, available enough to help them during these very interesting developmental years. As they are young adults themselves, some have already entered the workforce. They're interacting with society at a higher level. I try to leverage my experience, not to tell them how to be, but to create space that we can kind of have a really good, interesting conversation about it. So if they want to talk to me about college and their future, I get to add insights that they can make an informed decision versus this is just what you do because you're a good student or otherwise. Staying pliable. I don't want to be rigid as a parent. That's important. The second thing is, obviously, I want to continue to grow my practice. I bought the practice during the pandemic when it was a strange time for all entrepreneurs. I'm also in the healthcare space where things are very amorphous when it comes to general public sentiment about healthcare, insurance, you know, healthcare delivery, reliance on drugs. And so I'm trying to remain kind of a steady, uh, let's just say, sanctuary amidst the chaos of that space where obviously I want to keep serving the community that I have, but to grow or influence that people can feel safer in themselves and their ability to stay healthy, even when their insurance premiums double or triple, and they can't afford their drugs. And what does it mean to now take responsibility for yourself if these externalities are no longer available to you? Because unfortunately, that is going to be happening for a lot of people, especially next year. So I'm looking at how to pivot to being a sanctuary for people in that space. And then individually, I don't know. I jokingly said I turned 40 last year. I turned 40 last year, and I want to improve. I want to get into better shape. I've done a number of things that have sidelined some of my own teens when it comes to fitness. I want to get into better shape. I half jokingly said, should I meet certain metrics, I'm gonna do a kind of like a boudoir photo shoot and make a 13-month calendar out of it. But but I don't think the public eye will ever see that. But but I set odd goals like that because they're fun and they're very playful, and it just feels like something I would enjoy doing anyway. So maybe I'll get myself into shape and do something like that. And yeah, I I don't know, becoming more fiscally savvy, especially as I prepare for kids to enter college. I want to be able to provide, help in different ways. Because when you buy a business, I don't know if you know this, but pretty much makes you completely broke. So entrepreneurship is one of these things where you tie up a lot of your resources into making that work. Um, but as an entrepreneur, everything is always going great. Like to somebody who asks, "Oh my God, things are amazing. Oh, never better, best year." But in the background, you're kind of scrambling, right? So there's that fun part too of making your ideas a reality and again converging your vision into what's really going on.
Well, I think that's great. Let me wrap up with a couple quick questions for you. What's your favorite book that you've ever read?
Wow. So there's a book. This is one of the first easy books I ever read on like financial literacy. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. I forget the name of the author there, but allegedly it's based on some old tablets that were found from the destroyed Babylon, then the richest city in the world. And there was always tales or interactions from the people who made those tablets with a gentleman who was the richest person in the richest city in the world. And it had these really 10, very easy to follow 10 rules when it came to, financial literacy and self-sufficiency. So it's like 110 pages, super easy to read, highly recommend, because I know that in schools, like they don't talk about finances like ever when it comes to personal finances. And I think a lot of kids need to be going into college, they're getting their first credit cards more often than not to understand how debt works, how to build up, solvency and stuff like that. So I highly recommend
Hmm.
that because of how easy it is. Um, what else? And bizarrely, I still hold the 7 Harry Potter books, from the Chamber of Secrets to the Deathly Hallows, as some of the best young adult literature ever, because it inspired my young mind to think very creatively and to ingest a lot of reading in a short period of time. So I highly recommend young people and even adults who have never seen it to read the Harry Potter books, because it it does something really impressive when it comes to world building and character building. And if you want to manifest something from your imagination, there's a real value in writing it down. Um, and that I think was born out of some bedtime stories from J.K. Rowling with her own kids. And heck, my small children's book was born out of my relationship with my kids. And so, yeah, if you have a vision for something, just start writing it down. You never know how it will manifest, either in fiction or nonfiction.
Well, I was going to ask you earlier and I forgot. Forgive me. You have written a book because I mentioned you're an author. Tell me
Yeah,
the
yeah,
name of
yeah.
your book because I'm
Yeah,
familiar
sure.
with it, but the audience isn't. So go ahead and tell us the name of your book and, what made you write it.
Yeah, no problem. So, my book is called My Super Parents. I started writing it in 2019, 2020. This was when, again, my my relationship with my now ex-wife was, falling apart, and I just was losing myself a little bit. And my kids really kept me together. They had a vision of who I was that was far superior to the vision I had of myself. You talk to enough parents and they can kind of recall an interaction with their kids where their kids believed that they had superpowers. And my kids believed I had x-ray vision, that I could see what they were doing in the other room. And that felt like such a ubiquitous phenomenon that's not heavily explored, at least in children's books, that I decided to start writing about it. And I crafted this tale of a 6-year-old girl who is at her first grade career day with her parents. But rather than talking about what her parents do for a living, she decided to reveal all the evidence she's accumulated over the years that they have superpowers.
That's cool. I
Yeah.
remember when it came out and I was like, this is a really cool book. And the illustration was really good too.
Well, that was not me. I stayed in my lane. I had a vision for what all the art should look like, but I could not make it. So
Hmm.
I hired someone for that, um, which is again an understanding of my limitations. So yeah, feel free to delegate tasks to others who do it better than you. That's another big lesson that I had to learn.
So who's your favorite athlete of all time?
Oh man, I mean that's an easy one. I mean Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt. The big my big claim to fame is that one time I ran against him in a heat. He's 1 year my junior, but we were in the same class while I was on the track team. I was 14, he was 13, and it was a weird race, like a 300 meter, because back then he only used to run the 4 and the 2. He didn't used to run the 100, but it was a weird meet for the 300, and he was already so tall. Like at a 13-year-old, he was way bigger than everybody. And I mean, he smoked us all. So that's my big claim to fame is, running once and losing terribly to the great Usain Bolt at a track meet in like the countryside of Trelawney, I think, in Jamaica. And yeah, he's still a multi generational like phenomenon. I mean, his records are unassailable distances, the 1 and 2. And he's also just a great ambassador. If any, I didn't experience this because we didn't talk back then, but any athletes who interact with him talk about how encouraging he is. He always was. You could see the joy that he took in running and also representing, our country of Jamaica. Um, and he continues to this day to be a really amazing force for good, not just in track and field, but in public life. I know he's spending a lot of time right now in Jamaica after the hurricane, doing tons of relief work. So, I'm so grateful for who he is, and I aspire to, his level of not let's not say success, but impact.
That's great to hear. Yeah, because his records are pretty amazing, but it's even better to hear what a great person he is.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. The leadership and character piece for sure.
Hmm. Well, listen, I appreciate your time. This is our first Pro Talk podcast on the road. Coming back on, are you on 75 yet?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm deep in 75. I'm not even sure if I've passed the Florida Georgia border yet, but we are making some progress.
Well, good. Well, have a safe trip home, and again, you've dropped so many good nuggets of wisdom. I can't wait to go back and edit this and check it out again because I've written a good page of notes. So,
Wow, great.
Dr. Richard Cohen, we appreciate your time.
It's an absolute pleasure, Rob. And one day you'll have me back in the studio.
There we go. All right. So,
All right, take care.
again, till next time, make the most of your time and hang tough.